HOA security drew a gun on my daughter, not knowing she's an FBI tactical commander. A gun pointed directly at my daughter's face. I heard someone shout, "Freeze," and felt my entire body go cold. The person holding the weapon. Not a robber, not a criminal, it was our HOA security guard, from our own neighborhood. The reason? My daughter looked suspicious returning to her own home at 10 p.m. What this man didn't know. My daughter is an FBI tactical commander who has led some of the most dangerous raids in the country over the past 5 years. And things only went downhill from there. Where are you watching from right now? Drop a comment below, and follow along as I tell you the story of how an arrogant HOA security guard dug his own grave when he messed with the wrong family. My name is Michael Johnson. A 58-year-old retired diplomatic officer, who spent 3 decades navigating the complex political landscapes of foreign governments. I thought I'd seen it all, until I moved to Lakeside Pines, an upscale gated community in Connecticut that promised peace, security, and luxury living. What they didn't advertise in the glossy brochure was the dictatorship masquerading as a homeowners association. My wife passed away 5 years ago, and after spending years abroad, I wanted to settle somewhere beautiful and quiet. Lakeside Pines seemed perfect, with its pristine lawns, sparkling lake, and tight security. Little did I know that tight security would become my family's nightmare. My daughter Amy is 26, and unlike her diplomatic father, chose a more action-oriented career path. After graduating top of her class at Quantico, she rose through the ranks of the FBI with remarkable speed, eventually becoming a tactical commander, specializing in high-risk operations and financial crimes. I couldn't be prouder of her accomplishments. Though I rarely get to see her due to the confidential nature of her work. When she called to say she was coming home for a few weeks of Randar, after completing a 2-year international counterterrorism assignment, I was ecstatic. We had been living in Lakeside Pines for only 3 months, and I was eager to show her our new home. The HOA at Lakeside Pines was run with an iron fist by Robert Thompson, a 58-year-old former corporate executive with a God complex, and a trophy wife named Sarah, who treated the community as her personal fiefdom. From the moment I moved in, I found myself at odds with their excessive rules. Everything from the exact shade of white, permitted for window blinds, to which day of the week you could water your lawn. But the real enforcer of these petty tyrannies was Curtis Wilson, a 42-year-old former police officer who'd been dismissed from the force for excessive use of force. Now, as head of security for our HOA, he patrolled our streets like a warlord with his crew of 4 equally unpleasant guards. The incident happened on a Friday night in July. Amy's flight had been delayed, and she arrived at Lakeside Pines around 10 p.m. I had given her a key and the gate code, but forgot to inform security about her arrival, a simple oversight that should have been easily resolved. As I waited in the living room, I heard raised voices outside. When I opened the front door, I froze at the sight before me. Curtis Wilson had his gun drawn, and pointed directly at my daughter's face, while his partner Jason stood nearby with his hand on his holster. I don't care what ID you're showing me. You don't have resident clearance. Now you can watch the second part by pressing share and more. Day 2. HOA security drew a gun on my daughter, not knowing she's an FBI tactical commander. I don't care what ID you're showing me, you don't have resident clearance, Curtis was shouting at Amy, who remained perfectly calm, despite having a weapon aimed at her. Get on the ground now, or I will consider you a threat. The porch light illuminated the scene in harsh shadows. And I could see the neighbors' curtains twitching as they peered out at the commotion. Amy stood perfectly still, her hands visible, her face composed in a way that only years of facing actual danger could teach someone. She had recognized instantly that Curtis was holding a Glock 19. And that he almost certainly didn't have proper licensing to carry it as a private security guard. Curtis, what the hell are you doing? I shouted, rushing forward. That's my daughter. I moved a step between them, but Amy subtly shifted her stance to keep me from putting myself in the line of fire. Curtis didn't lower his weapon immediately, his face flushed with the thrill of power. Your daughter should have checked in with security, he sneered, finally lowering the gun, after what seemed like an eternity. We have protocols here, Mr. Johnson. No exceptions, even for FBI agents if that idea is even real. Amy remained silent, studying Curtis with the focused attention of someone memorizing every detail for later. Only when the gun was completely lowered did she speak, her voice measured and precise. Mr. Wilson, I believe you should be aware that pointing a firearm at a federal officer without cause is a felony. Additionally, I don't believe you have the proper licensing to carry that weapon as a security guard in this state. The color drained from Curtis's face, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. This is private property. Different rules apply here, he said, though with noticeably less conviction. I'll be reporting this incident to Mr. Thompson. Expect to hear from the HOA board. As they walked away, I could hear Jason whispering urgently to Curtis, clearly concerned about what had just transpired. I ushered Amy inside and closed the door, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and residual fear. I'm so sorry about that, sweetheart. This place has strict security, but that was completely unacceptable. Amy set her bag down calmly and gave me a reassuring hug. It's okay, Dad, I've faced worse. But I think we need a long-term strategy for dealing with these guys. That man is dangerous, not because he's skilled, but because he's insecure and armed. That's always a bad combination. As we sat in the kitchen that night, catching up over cups of tea that grew cold as we talked, Amy asked pointed questions about the HOA, their operations, and particularly about Curtis Wilson. Her analytical mind was already at work, connecting dots I hadn't even seen. You know, she said thoughtfully, sometimes the most interesting cases aren't the big terrorist plots or bank heists. Sometimes it's the small-town tyrants, abusing their little kingdoms, that need the most attention. I laughed at that, relieved to have my capable daughter home, but I had no idea how prophetic her words would prove to be. The next morning brought the expected knock on our door. Robert Thompson stood there in pressed khakis, and a polo shirt emblazoned with the Lakeside Pines logo. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his expression bore the practiced concern that barely masked his obvious disdain. Behind him stood his wife, Sarah, dressed as if for a country club brunch rather than a neighborhood confrontation. Robert held a formal letter of warning in his manicured hand. "Mr. Johnson," he said, not bothering to wait for an invitation inside, "we need to discuss last night's unfortunate incident." His voice carried the artificial warmth of someone who had taken too many executive communication courses. "Unfortunate incident," I repeated, feeling my diplomatic training battling with my parental instinct to tell him exactly where he could shove that letter. "Your security guard pointed a loaded weapon at my daughter's face for the crime of coming home after dark. There's nothing unfortunate about it. It was illegal. Now you can watch the second part by pressing share and more." Date 3, HOA security drew a gun on my daughter, not knowing she's an FBI tactical commander. I felt my diplomatic training battling with my parental instinct to tell him exactly where he could shove that letter. "Your security guard pointed a loaded weapon at my daughter's face for the crime of coming home after dark. There's nothing unfortunate about it. It was illegal and dangerous." Robert's smile didn't waver, though his eyes hardened. Our security team was simply following protocol. "Had you properly registered your guest?" I cut him off, something I rarely did in my diplomatic career. "My daughter is not a guest, she's my family, visiting her home, and no protocol justifies drawing a weapon on an unarmed person showing identification." Amy appeared beside me, dressed casually, but with an alertness that never seemed to leave her. She placed a calming hand on my arm before addressing Robert directly. "Mr. Thompson, I understand the need for security protocols. However, I'd be interested to know if all your security personnel are properly licensed for armed work in this state. I noticed some irregularities last night that concerned me." Her tone was professional, almost friendly, but I recognized the subtle interrogation technique. Robert's smile flickered momentarily before he recovered. "All our staff meet the highest standards, Miss Johnson. Now, if you'll accept this formal warning, we can put this matter behind us." He held out the envelope, which neither of us moved to take. "I don't think we will be accepting that," Amy said pleasantly. "But I appreciate you stopping by." She closed the door gently but firmly, leaving Robert and Sarah standing stunned on our porch. Through the window, I watched them retreat down the walkway. Sarah's animated gestures, suggesting she was already spinning this encounter for maximum neighborhood gossip value. That was satisfying, I admitted, but probably not strategic. Amy smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. "Oh, I don't know. Sometimes you need to establish clear boundaries before you can begin negotiations. And make no mistake, Dad, we're now in negotiations, whether they realize it or not." Later that day, we met Linda Peterson, a 65-year-old former school teacher who lived 3 doors down. She brought over a welcome pie, belatedly, she explained, because she'd been visiting her grandchildren. In the course of conversation, it became clear that Linda represented a silent faction in Lakeside Pines. Residents, who chafed under the Thompson regime, but lacked the influence or courage to challenge it. "Robert and Sarah have run this place like their personal fief for 5 years, she explained as we sat on the patio. "Anyone who questions them finds themselves buried in violation notices, or excluded from community events. Most people just pay the ridiculous fines and keep their heads down." Amy listened intently, asking occasional questions that seemed casual, but were clearly building a comprehensive picture of the community dynamics. Over the next few days, Amy immersed herself in studying the HOA bylaws, pointing out numerous clauses that wouldn't hold up to legal scrutiny. Meanwhile, Curtis began parking his security vehicle across from our house for extended periods. An obvious intimidation tactic that might have worked on someone who hadn't faced down actual terrorists. I noticed other changes too. Neighbors who had been friendly suddenly became scarce, and Linda reported that Sarah was hosting a ladies' tea to which I, the only single father in the community, was conspicuously not invited. Amy spent hours on her laptop, occasionally making quiet phone calls from the privacy of her room. When I asked what she was researching, she showed me a disturbing pattern. Curtis Wilson had been dismissed from the police force after multiple excessive force complaints. And Robert had personally intervened to get him hired at Lakeside Pines, despite his troubling record. More concerning, the security company officially contracted by the HOA appeared to be paying Curtis significantly more than standard rates for his position. "There's something not right with the finances here," Amy murmured, scrolling through public records she'd somehow accessed. "The HOA fees in this community are among the highest in the state, but the services don't match the expenditure." The Cold War escalated when Amy encountered Sarah Thompson at the local grocery store. I wasn't present, but Amy recounted how Sarah had accidentally rammed her shopping cart into Amy's while pretending not to see her. "Oh, it's the FBI agent," Sarah had said loudly enough for nearby shoppers to hear. "I hope you're not investigating our little grocery store." We're all law-abiding citizens here, except for those who don't follow the rules. Amy had simply smiled and replied, "Actually, financial crimes are one of my specialties. It's amazing what people think they can hide in plain sight." Sarah had blanched slightly before hurrying away, but not before a woman in a professional pantsuit witnessed the entire exchange with evident interest. That woman turned out to be Jessica Miller, a 40-year-old attorney who served on the HOA board, but had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Robert's leadership. She approached Amy in the parking lot, introduced herself, and suggested they meet for coffee. Now you can watch the second part by pressing share and more.